On June 20th,
859
1944, the United States ship Enterprise was in the Philippine Sea. As he stood in the enlisted mess hall, Lieutenant Junior Grade Saburo Kitamura of the Imperial Japanese Navy clutched a tray that was laden with more food than his whole squadron had shared
And
in
now
3
it can be
days.
told story.
His hands were
4:25 in the
shaking
Mediterranean
as he
on the
gripped
afternoon
tray.
of November the
A glass
25th,
of cold
1941.
milk, a glass of mashed potatoes swimming in butter, green beans, white bread, apple pie, and fried chicken are all included in this meal. Irritated by the delay, the American sailor who was leading the line of those waiting to be served pointed
Miss
angrily toward the ice
The
cream
stricken
stand.
battleship heeled over
Is
to
it
port.
chocolate or vanilla
Within
that
4
you
minutes
desire?
of being hit,
The
her after
question was
magazine blew up.
completely illogical.
She sank with a
Ice
loss of
cream was not
859
available
lives.
on board the battleships. Refrigeration was necessary for ice cream, but these containers were not equipped to provide it. However, here, aboard the most battle-hardened carrier in the United States, prisoners of war were given the option of selecting from a variety of frozen desserts. Just 4 hours earlier, Kitamura had been rescued from the waters of the Philippine Sea during the Great Marianas Turkey Shot. One of the 43 Japanese airmen who were retrieved was an individual. In the best-case scenario, he anticipated being tortured and starved to death. There had been no ambiguity in the Japanese propaganda. The people of the United States were barbarians who devoured their prisoners and devils who took pleasure in agony. Rather than that, the medical corpsman had healed his wounds,
There have been no more poignant
administered
pictures than
morphine
these.
to alleviate his
We
suffering,
pay tribute to the
and
gallant
now
crew of
offered him
HMS
different
Varna
kinds of ice cream.
and salute the end
The
of a
decision of
noble
whether
ship.
chocolate or vanilla would plague him for decades to come. It was at that moment that his comprehension of the war, of America, and of everything else started to disintegrate. During the course of the Pacific War, about 35,000 Japanese military soldiers would be taken captive by American naval forces and sea
The cause of the
thieves,
final
which would
explosion has
demolish
never been
all they
ascertained.
believed about the
Probably it will
inadequacy
never
of
be
their
known.
adversary.
Barnum
While
was
they
the
were
only
on the
British
ship,
battleship
they
sunk at
found
sea
that the
by a German.
enlisted sailors had better food than the Japanese admirals, that the technology created fresh water from salt water in endless amounts, and that the ice cream makers continued to work continually despite the fact that they were engaged in war. The spiritual roots of Japanese military philosophy would be destroyed more severely by these contacts with American naval logistics than by any defeat on the battlefield. Calories and capacities were used in the calculations that were made from the mathematics of marine abundance. Rice balls and pickled vegetables were the only things that Japanese sailors ingested for sustenance, whereas American seamen devoured 4,100 calories of a wide variety of fresh foods every day. During the time that Japanese carriers were manually producing aviation fuel, American ships were fully mechanized. During the time that the Imperial Navy was praying to the gods for heavenly breezes, the United States Navy was able to create its own weather by bringing refrigeration, air conditioning, and ice cream to sea. The time when Japanese survivors were brought on board American boats marked the beginning of the shift. The rescue operation that took place in 1945 on board the USS Missouri was chronicled by Commander Mitsuo Fuida, who was the architect behind the attack on Pearl Harbor, and eventually became a Christian missionary in the United States. As they dragged me up like a fish that had been caught, I readied myself for my own demise. Instead, a medical officer checked my wounds as a sailor gave me coffee when I arrived at the hospital. Hot, authentic coffee topped with sugar and cream. In 1942, I had not had a single sip of coffee. Having run out of donuts, the sailor expressed his regret to the crew. The disparity between propaganda and reality was brought to light by the casual reference of reduced donut supplies during a time when Japanese warriors were eating leather belts. The Imperial Japanese Navy's own reports, which were recovered after the war, demonstrated that by 1944, enlisted sailors were given around 400 calories per day when supplies were sufficient. Fish was the primary source of protein during times when boats had more fuel available for fishing. There was a widespread vitamin deficit. Crews were tormented by things like Barbary, scurvy, and night blindness. On the other hand, the American Navy rations consisted of fresh meat on a daily basis, frozen vegetables, freshly baked bread, dairy goods, eggs for breakfast, and a variety of beverage alternatives. It has been determined by the Office of Naval Records that during the year 1944, carrier mess halls were responsible for serving around 15,000 meals on a daily basis on major carriers. The menus featured hundreds of different alternatives. Possibly on Tuesday, roast meat will be served, the chicken fried on Thursday, and the ham with pineapple on Sunday. The Japanese POWs, who were used to consistent rice meals, were unable to fathom the diversity that was available to them at sea. The Japanese detainees increased their level of shock when they found the quarters of the enlisted troops. Petty Officer Kazuo Sakamaki, who was the first Japanese person to be captured by the United States, and who was taken from a submarine at Pearl Harbor, subsequently spoke about his awe at the facilities of the American submarines. The showers on the enemy submarines were equipped with hot water. Mattresses and clean linens were provided in the bunks that the personnel slept in. The library had a collection of magazines and books. There was a coffee urn found in the mess hall that was never empty. Underwater, they had a more comfortable lifestyle than we did on land. Additionally, the presence of ice cream dispensers on American battleships had a particularly destructive effect on the psychological state of the crew. The Japanese Navy believed that it was impossible to make ice cream while at sea, since it was a luxury that required resources that no fighting vessel could spare. Despite this, by 1943, the United States Navy had deployed floating ice cream manufacturing. The ice cream plant aboard the USS Lexington had the capacity to manufacture 500 gallons. Barges made of concrete were turned into ice cream containers, and each shift produced 5,000 gallons of ice cream. During the time when the USS Lexington CV-16 was being torpedoed and sinking, it was alleged that sailors who were seeking refuge on other vessels salvaged ice cream stores before departing ship. At the same time that Japanese captives witnessed American damage control crews receiving ice cream sundaes as a kind of war rations. These groups were fatigued from fighting fires and flooding. An excessive amount of cognitive dissonance was there. Their nation, which was battling for its own life, was unable to supply even the most fundamental sustenance to the soldiers. During the conflict, the adversary, who was rumored to be cowardly and feeble, provided ice cream to the sailors. Chief Petty Officer Yoshio Yamada was taken captive when his ship sunk at Leyte Gulf. He was then moved to shore facilities after spending 3 days on board the USS Iowa prior to his release. It wasn't until decades later that his secret notebook was found, and it contained the following entry. The crew of the battleship eats in shifts, but the food never stops. In addition to making ice, they have equipment that can peel potatoes and slice bread. The kitchen is open around the clock. After one lunch, they discarded more food than my entire ship received in weekly supply as a result of their actions. The guard chuckled and responded, "It's not waste if you have unlimited supplies." She stated this in response to my question on why they squander. Japanese detainees who were used to washing their clothing in salt water were taken aback by the quality of the laundry facilities. In addition to pressing equipment, American carriers were equipped with industrial washing machines and dryers. Navy enlisted personnel were provided with clean uniforms on a bi-weekly basis. On Japanese ships, where men would go weeks without bathing, fresh water made its way freely for showers, washing, and cleaning. This water was so precious that it could not be measured. On a daily basis, the evaporators aboard the USS Enterprise were capable of producing 140,000 gallons of fresh water, a quantity that exceeds the combined production capacity of the entire Japanese carrier fleet. In the views of Japanese military personnel, recreation facilities on American carriers appeared to be beyond the realm of possibility. Movie theaters that showed Hollywood films, libraries that included thousands of books, gymnasiums that featured basketball courts, and hobby stores that specialized in carpentry and crafts were all found on ships. Sports scores, comedy comics, and news from home were all included in the USS Enterprise's newspaper, which was issued every day while the ship was at sea. The Japanese carriers featured shrine rooms and meditation areas for their passengers. The soda fountains that served milkshakes were located on American carriers. In the aftermath of his Zero being shot down over Iwima, Lieutenant Commander Tishi Mieta was taken captive and ended up spending 2 weeks on board the USS Bunker Hill. His testimony to American interrogators later revealed that he had stated, "Your enlisted sailors live better than our officers. They have radios in their quarters, photos of their girlfriends, and parcels from home that contain chocolate and smokes from their families." Despite the fact that the cuisine would be a feast for Japanese admirals, they gripe about it. A candy bar was thrown away by one of the sailors since it had some degree of melting. This candy bar had more sugar than the Japanese pilots had consumed in the previous few months,
in the Mediterranean
and further
on the
chasm
afternoon of
was
November the
revealed by the
25th,
medical
1941.
facilities. The primary goal of Japanese Navy medicine was to restore injured service members to action, regardless of their condition. American sick bays provided the same high-quality medical care to their adversaries as they did to their own sailors. Operating rooms on ships were equipped with X-ray machines, blood banks, and surgical equipment that was comparable to that found in shore hospitals. Antibiotics, and in particular penicillin, appeared to be a miracle to Japanese medical staff, who witnessed infected wounds heal in a matter of days rather than weeks. After some time had passed, Second S. Robert Wagner, a pharmacist, recalled treating Japanese detainees while he was serving aboard the USS Intrepid. That we would spend medication on our adversaries was incomprehensible to them. On many occasions, a pilot who was suffering from a severely infected leg wound attempted to refuse treatment by stating, "Save it for Americans." To persuade him that we had sufficient supplies, I had to demonstrate our medical supplies, which included lockers stocked with sulfa, penicillin, and morphine. Suddenly, he began to weep. The repair facilities were a demonstration of the economic superiority of the United States at sea. Ships from Japan made their way back to their home ports in order to undergo any necessary repairs. Ships from the United States made repairs while they were in transit. Repair ships, floating dry docks, and carrier machine shops are all opportunities for the production of replacement components, the rebuilding of engines, and the fabrication of completely new machinery.
The cause of the final explosion has never been ascertained.
USS Enterprise
Probably
was
it will never be
capable
known.
of producing any
Bardham was
component
the only
that was
British
smaller
battleship
than
sunk
an
at sea by a
aircraft
German.
engine. Continuous operation was maintained in the welding shop. While the ship was engaged in combat, the electrical shop was rewiring the systems. When kamikaze strikes became more frequent in 1945, Japanese pilots who survived crashes were able to experience firsthand the supremacy of American damage control. When Enin Ryuji Nagatsuka was rescued after his damaged Zero ditched near the USS Randolph, he observed the crew of the carrier repairing kamikaze damage as they were in the process of performing flying operations. In an instant, they were able to put out flames with foam, pumps that were able to extract water at a quicker rate than it was being introduced, plates made of metal that were used to close holes as we observed. The teams operated with a precision that was choreographed. No yelling and no misunderstandings. Within hours, they were able to correct what would have caused Japanese carriers to sink. The Japanese were unable to comprehend the food production techniques that were utilized on American carriers. 15,000 loaves of bread were manufactured by bakeries every single day. Whole beef carcasses were prepared at butcher shops and kept in freezers that were larger than Japanese submarine refrigerators. On a daily basis, ice machines created tons of ice for the purpose of preserving food and beverages. More electricity was consumed by the galley on the USS Enterprise than by the entire fleet of Japanese warships. It was possible for steam kettles to simultaneously cook 300 gallons of soup. The duties that required dozens of Japanese sailors to do were undertaken by machines such as electric mixers, automated dishwashers, and mechanical potato peelers. The third facet of the American abundance was revealed by the discovery of supply ships. During the months that they waited for replenishment, Japanese naval troops sometimes received only a quarter of what they needed. Weekly supplies were sent to American fast carrier groups while they were at sea. Engine oilers moved millions of gallons of gasoline from one vehicle to another. Tons of ordnance were transported by ships carrying ammunition. Fresh food, letters, replacement people, and luxury products were only some of the things that store ships delivered. During the replenishing process, Lieutenant Minoru Tanaka saw it from the brigadier of the USS Hornet. During the same moment, 3 ships approached the shore. Ammunition, fuel lines to the port, high lines to starboard, and helicopters bringing mail overhead are all examples of lines. Over the course of 3 hours, they moved more supplies than Japanese ships had gotten in the preceding 3 months. Fruit, lettuce, and tomatoes were among the fresh foods that were available. In fact, fruit. At the same time, when Americans were eating salads at sea, we were fighting for the emperor with the bellies empty. The Japanese captives, who were only able to get 1 letter per year if they were lucky, were particularly impressed with the mail system. Mail was delivered to American sailors on a weekly basis, even when they were at war. As a result of V-mail, thousands of mails that were photographically reduced arrived. The packages that came from home included things like cookies, sweets, literature, records, and photos. Because it was impossible for Japanese forces to operate beyond the oceans of their nation, the mail call helped to keep American morale up by providing a connection to their motherland. The most significant psychological impact arrived over the holiday season of 1944. The holiday parties that were held for Japanese captives on board American boats were more extravagant than the Japanese New Year feasts that were held before the war. On the 25th of December in 1944, menus from the USS Enterprise. It is documented that there was a roast turkey with stuffing, a ham with pineapple glaze, mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce, 3 different veggies, fresh rolls, 3 different types of pie, ice cream, sweets, nuts, and coffee. The Americans celebrated their Christmas while we attacked them. Seaman. First Class Hiroshi Nakamura wrote in a concealed diary while he was being held captive aboard the USS Saratoga from the United States Navy. Every single sailor was given presents by groups back in their home country. Cigarettes, candies, literature, and razors are all examples. The missal was embellished with lights and paper decorations. In addition to playing music, they sang songs. They had a joyful time. At the same time that our adversaries were celebrating with an abundance of food, we were starving and dying for the emperor. At this point, I realized that Japan had already been defeated. Beyond food, the insight encompassed a basic perspective on the world. When confronted with the industrial realities of the United States, the Yamato spirit, which signified Japan's confidence that spiritual power could triumph despite material inferiority, fell apart. Later on, Enenteo Yamamoto, who had been arrested at Okinawa, stated, "We were taught that Americans were weak, that their abundance made them weak. However, I witnessed them putting out fires over a period of 12 hours, consume ice cream, and then return to the fight. They were not weakened by the plenty. Rather, it served to support them. We were the ones who were weak. We imagined that spirit could take the place of nourishment. By the time the war was over, Japanese prisoners had seen things that were impossible. Carriers that produce fresh water from salt water, ice cream in the tropics, movies at sea, rise in conflict zones, hospitals afloat, and machine shops in war are all examples of things that may be transported. They have tried dishes that the majority of Japanese don't even know exist. Food items such as hamburgers, hot dogs, milkshakes, chocolate cake, and apple pie. They were familiar with the riches that democracy provides. Food consumed by enlisted soldiers who are officers, each and every race working together. The adversaries are undergoing medical treatment. These discoveries were disseminated throughout Japan as a result of the repatriation of Japanese detainees following the surrender. Inadvertently becoming ambassadors of American abundance, former PS took up this role. Their testimonials are more persuasive than any propaganda that the occupation has to provide. They related stories of ships where sailors grumbled about food that the Japanese would regard to be a feast, where ice cream was a common occurrence, and where enlisted men maintained a higher standard of living than the Japanese elite. Captain Mitsuo Fuida, the architect of Pearl Harbor, was a convert to Christianity and a missionary after seeing the riches that the United States of America had to offer. It was that very first cup of coffee on board the USS Missouri that provided the foundation for his change from the mastermind behind the surprise attack to the preacher of reconciliation. There was every reason for the Americans to despise me and to allow me to perish. However, they provided me with medical treatment, food, and dignity instead. There was no weapon that could compare to the force of this wealth of spirit. An overview of the statistics taken from the records of the United States Navy. The daily consumption of calories. 400 calories for the United States Navy. A total of 12,400 calories. 140,000 gallons of fresh water are produced by huge U.S. airlines every single day. The USS Lexington produces 500 gallons of ice cream every single day. There are 15,000 loaves of bread produced every day by the USS Enterprise. Mail delivery on a weekly basis, even in areas of conflict. There are 2 to 3 different films shown at the theater every week. Do the laundry twice. Complete surgical capability at sea, weekly clean clothes, and medical supplies are all provided, with a revolutionary message. The Japanese POWs, who had the opportunity to witness the wealth of American carriers, returned to a nation that had been decimated. Not by brutality, but through compassion, and not through restriction, but rather through abundance. The adversary's power was derived, in terms of practicalities rather than spirit. It was through their testimony that Japan was better prepared for the occupation and change. As a result of their vision of the future, it had the flavor of chocolate ice cream that was served at sea during a fight. One of the most comprehensive ideological shifts in the annals of history is represented by the change of Japanese military men as a result of their exposure to the availability of American naval might. Soldiers who had the expectation of dying for the emperor instead lived to tell the tale of American ice cream machines' existence. Those pilots who tried suicide strikes were rescued so that they may observe the casual plenty that democracy provides. It was discovered by sailors who had been prepared for spiritual battle that the presence of worldly riches did not degrade fighting spirit, but rather strengthened it. It was ultimately the ice cream machines on American carriers that were able to do what bombs were unable to. Exhaustive eradication of the mythos behind Japanese militarism. The soft serve machines that continued to function even as ships broke apart. The freshly baked bread that was prepared throughout fights, and the medical attention that was provided to adversaries. The Japanese gained a new perspective on the might of the United States and their own loss as a result of these insights. It was not as defeated warriors that they returned to Japan. Rather, they were witnesses to an abundance that was beyond anyone's belief. They brought with them truths that would transform their nation from a militaristic empire into a democratic ally. The narrative serves as a reminder that sometimes the most significant triumphs are not achieved via devastation, but rather by protest. There is a possibility that plenty is more potent than weaponry, that a nation's actual power may be deduced from the manner in which it feeds its adversaries. The Japanese, who were unable to believe that American carriers had ice cream machines, acquired the knowledge that democracy's most powerful weapon was its capacity to generate plenty, even during times of war, to share abundance even with adversaries, and to preserve humanity even in the midst of the ferocity of warfare. What's up? What's up?